The wind across the Montana cemetery carried the smell of sage and distant rain. Grace Mackenzie stood alone at the edge of her father's grave, watching the coffin descend into red clay earth. She was 26 years old, wearing a black dress she'd bought at a Billings department store 3 hours earlier, and she was the only person crying. Around her, 24 ranchers in Sunday suits shuffled their boots and checked their watches. They'd come to pay respects to Colonel Roy Mackenzie, the man who'd built a 15,000-acre cattle empire from nothing, the man who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam and come home to make the Badlands bloom. But they weren't looking at the coffin. They were looking at the woman standing 15 feet away, checking her phone. Vivian Cross wore a black Chanel suit that cost more than most of these men earned in a month. Her heels sank into the soft ground with each impatient shift of weight. She'd taken off her sunglasses exactly once when the priest began speaking, and Grace had seen her eyes. Dry, calculating, already counting. Behind Vivian stood her son, Dylan, 24 years old, hungover, texting. He hadn't looked up from his phone since they arrived. Grace closed her eyes and tried to remember her father's voice. 8 years. 8 years since she'd heard it. 8 years since the day he'd caught her kissing Billy Reeves behind the horse barn and told her to pack her bags. She could still see the disappointment in his eyes. Not anger, disappointment, worse. "You're better than this ranch life, Gracie," he'd said, voice quiet and final. "Go to Bozeman, get your degree, be something more than a rancher's daughter." She'd screamed at him, called him controlling, old-fashioned, cruel. He just stood there, jaw set, and pointed at her truck. She'd driven away that August morning and never came back. Thanksgiving, he was busy. Christmas, he didn't answer. By the second year, her calls went straight to voicemail. By the fourth year, she stopped trying. Now here she was, staring at his coffin, and all she could think was that she'd wasted 8 years being stubborn. The priest finished his prayer. The gathered ranchers filed past the grave, each dropping a handful of dirt onto the polished wood. They nodded at Grace as they passed, but none of them spoke. Vivian had made sure of that. For 3 years, Vivian had controlled every aspect of Roy Mackenzie's life. Who visited? Who called? Who knew what? She'd spread word through Miles City and Red Lodge that Grace had abandoned her father, that she was ungrateful, selfish, too good for Montana. The ranchers believed it because what else could they believe? Roy never said different. As the crowd thinned, one man remained. Walter Hayes, 72 years old, lean as a fence post, skin like old leather. He'd been Roy's foreman for 40 years, fought beside him in the Central Highlands, helped him build the Mackenzie Ranch from a failed homestead into an empire. Walt walked up to the grave, knelt slowly, placed both palms flat on the dirt. "See you on the other side, Colonel," he whispered. Then he stood and turned to Grace. His eyes were wet. "Your daddy talked about you every day," Walt said, voice rough. "Every single day." Grace's throat closed. She couldn't speak. Walt stepped closer, lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Don't believe what that woman says. Roy loved you till his last breath. Remember that." He touched the brim of his hat and walked away. Grace stood there long after everyone left, long after the cemetery workers began filling the grave, long after Vivian's black Escalade disappeared down the dirt road in a cloud of dust. She stood there until the sun touched the western mountains, and the sky turned the color of blood and gold. Then she got in her old F-150 and drove to Billings for the reading of the will. The law office of Porter and Associates sat on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown, overlooking the Yellowstone River. Grace arrived at 9 in the morning, 2 hours of sleep in a motel behind her, and found Vivian already in the conference room. The older woman sat at the head of the mahogany table like she owned it. She'd changed from Chanel to Armani, black suit perfectly tailored, diamond earrings catching the morning light. Her nails were painted the color of dried blood. Dylan slouched in the chair beside her, same clothes as yesterday, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. "Grace," Vivian said, not looking up from her phone. "You're late." Grace checked her watch. She was 4 minutes early. "Good morning, Vivian." "Sit anywhere, this won't take long." Grace took the chair at the far end of the table, as far from Vivian as the room allowed. The conference room was cold. The air conditioning hummed. On the wall behind Vivian hung an oil painting of cattle in a winter field. The door opened and Samuel Porter walked in. He was 65, white-haired, carrying a leather portfolio thick as a Bible. He'd handled Mackenzie legal affairs for 30 years. He'd drafted Roy's first will when Grace was born. He'd filed the incorporation papers when Roy expanded into water bottling. He'd been at every family Christmas until Vivian came along. Now he wouldn't meet Grace's eyes. "Good morning," Porter said, setting the portfolio on the table. "Thank you both for coming." "Let's skip the pleasantries, Samuel," Vivian said. "Just read it." Porter opened the portfolio and pulled out a document bound in blue backing. His hands shook slightly. "This is the last will and testament of Roy Edward Mackenzie, executed on February 14th of this year. 4 months ago, 4 months before he died." Grace's stomach turned. Porter cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Roy Edward Mackenzie, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils." The legal language washed over Grace like cold water. She heard it but couldn't process it. "To my wife, Vivian Cross, I leave the Mackenzie Ranch headquarters, including all buildings, improvements, and 15,000 acres as described in attachment A. I further leave to Vivian all cattle, horses, and ranch equipment as itemized in attachment B, as well as all interest in Rocky Mountain Pure Water Company, estimated value $20 million. Finally, I leave to Vivian all funds in our joint accounts and my investment portfolio, totaling approximately $20 million. Vivian smiled. She didn't try to hide it. Porter continued. "To my stepson, Dylan Cross, I leave the hunting lodge at Bear Creek, the fleet of vehicles as listed in Attachment C, and a trust fund in the amount of $500,000. Dylan nodded, still looking at his phone. Porter paused. He took off his reading glasses. He looked at Grace for the first time. "To my daughter, Grace Mackenzie, I leave the line shack at Crow's Nest Ridge, including 40 acres as described in Attachment D, and all contents thereof." The room went silent. Grace stared at Porter. He stared back, and in his eyes she saw something: sadness, pity, and something else: apology. Vivian laughed. It was a high, sharp sound that echoed off the walls. "The line shack," she said. "He left you the line shack." Grace found her voice. "That's it, that's everything." Porter nodded slowly. "That is the extent of the bequest to you, yes." Vivian stood, gathering her purse. "Well, that was simple. Dylan, we have lunch reservations." Grace couldn't move. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would he do this?" Vivian stopped at the door and turned. Her smile was cold. "Because you abandoned him, sweetheart. You left him alone for 8 years. You broke his heart. Some things can't be forgiven. I tried to call, I tried to visit, you blocked me." "Did I, or did you just give up?" Vivian tilted her head. "You made your choice when you drove away. Roy made his when he wrote this will." Dylan finally looked up from his phone. The line shack doesn't even have electricity, Grace, or plumbing. It's literally a pile of rotten wood. Dad basically left you a condemned building and a patch of dirt. He laughed and followed his mother out. Grace sat alone in the conference room, staring at her reflection in the polished table. Porter stood by the door, portfolio clutched to his chest. "Mr. Porter," Grace whispered, "was he angry at me at the end?" Porter was quiet for a long moment. "Your father was the sharpest man I ever knew," he said finally, "right up until his last day." "Then why did he hate me?" "He didn't hate you." Porter walked back to the table and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Plain white, sealed with red wax, her name written across the front in her father's blocky handwriting. "Roy gave me this 3 weeks before he died. He said to give it to you only if Vivian inherited the ranch. Only to you, no one else." Grace took the envelope with trembling hands. "What is it?" "I don't know, I never opened it." Porter leaned closer, lowered his voice to barely a whisper. "But your father was the sharpest man I ever knew. If he left you that shack, maybe you should look closer." He straightened, composed himself. "The deed and keys are in this packet. The property is fully paid. No taxes owed. It's yours free and clear." He set a manila envelope on the table and walked out, closing the door behind him. Grace sat alone in the cold conference room for 20 minutes. Then she picked up both envelopes, walked to her truck and pointed it east. Toward the mountains. Toward Crow's Nest Ridge. Toward a rotting line, shack her father had left her instead of a fortune. The drive took 4 hours. East out of Billings on Interstate 90, then south on state highways that got smaller and rougher until the asphalt gave way to gravel. The land changed as she drove. The river valley flattened into high plains, then climbed into badlands, striped stone rising in jagged formations against an endless sky. She crossed into Wyoming without noticing. No signs, no border station, just more empty land under more empty sky. Grace hadn't been to Crow's Nest Ridge since she was 16. Roy had brought her out here during a cattle drive, shown her the line shack, told her it was the original Mackenzie homestead. His great-grandfather had built it in 1892, before Montana was even a state. "This is where it started, Gracie," Roy had said, hand on her shoulder. "Everything we have came from this piece of ground." She'd been bored, 16 and bored and thinking about boys. Now she was 26 and alone, and her father was dead, and this piece of ground was all she had left. The GPS died 30 miles from the ridge. No cell service, no satellite signal, just a hand-drawn map Porter had included with the deed. She drove on memory and instinct, following cow paths and dry creek beds, the truck bouncing over rocks and ruts. Twice she got stuck and had to dig herself out. Once she thought she was lost and almost turned back. Then she crested a rise and saw it. Crow's Nest Ridge stood like a spine against the western sky. Red stone and sage, rising 200 feet above the surrounding plain. And at the top, barely visible, a dark shape that might have been a building or might have been a shadow. The line shack. Grace drove the last 5 miles in low gear, nursing the truck up switchbacks that were more suggestion than road. The air grew cooler, thinner. The smell of sage gave way to pine. She reached the top just as the sun touched the horizon. The line shack sat in a clearing ringed by ponderosa pine and juniper. It was worse than Dylan had described. One room, maybe 20 feet by 10, walls made of hand-hewn logs that had weathered to the color of bone. The roof sagged in the middle, half the shingles missing. The door hung by a single hinge. Grace turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, she could hear wind through the pines and the distant cry of a hawk. She sat in the truck, looking at the ruin, and felt something break inside her chest. This was it. This was what her father thought she deserved. She was about to start the engine, about to leave, when she saw the second truck. An old Ford F-250 parked in the trees 50 yards away, faded red paint, Montana plates. Grace's hand went to the glove box. She didn't own a gun, but she wished she did. The truck door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, lean, wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans held up by suspenders, white hair under a stained Stetson. He walked toward her with the easy gait of someone who'd spent his whole life on uneven ground. Grace recognized him before he was halfway across the clearing. Walt Hayes. She got out of the truck. "Walt, what are you doing here?" The old foreman stopped 10 feet away and pushed his hat back. "Figured you'd come eventually," he said. "Thought you might need some help." "Help with what? There's nothing here." Walt looked at the shack, then back at Grace. His eyes were the color of winter sky. "Roy asked me to watch this place, keep it ready for you." "Ready for what?" "Reckon that's for you to find out." He nodded at the envelope in her hand. "You read his letter yet?" Grace looked down. She'd been holding it so tight the wax seal had cracked. "Not yet." "Might want to do that before you decide there's nothing here." Walt walked past her to the shack. He tested the broken door, found it too damaged, and kicked it off its hinges entirely. It fell into the dirt with a crash that sent birds scattering from the pines. "Careful where you step," he called back. "Floorboards are soft." Grace followed him into the shack. The interior was dim, lit only by gaps in the roof and walls. It smelled of rot and animal musk. Something rustled in the corner and she jumped. "Just a pack rat," Walt said. "Place is full of them." He pulled a flashlight from his pocket and swept the beam across the room. Empty, except for a rusted wood stove and the skeletal frame of what might have been a bunk. The floor was covered in pine needles and droppings. "Why did he leave me this?" Grace asked. "Why would he do this to me?" Walt turned the flashlight on her. "You really think Roy was punishing you?" "What else could it be?" "Grace, your daddy was a lot of things. Stubborn, hard-headed, but he wasn't cruel and he wasn't stupid." Walt moved the flashlight to the corner where the floor met the wall. "See that?" Grace looked. In the corner, beneath years of debris, she could see the edge of something dark. Not wood, metal. "What is it?" "Iron ring. Your daddy installed it about 5 years back." "What's it for?" Walt smiled. "Why don't you read his letter and find out?" Grace pulled out the envelope, broke the wax seal, and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Her father's handwriting, blocky and precise. She read it aloud, voice shaking. "Gracie, if you're reading this, I'm gone and that viper has her fangs in my ranch. I'm sorry for every harsh word, every year we lost. I sent you away because I loved you, not because I was ashamed." Grace's vision blurred. She wiped her eyes and continued. "I saw what Vivian was the day I married her. A mistake born of loneliness after your mama died, but I was trapped. 3 years ago I found out she was planning something. I hired investigators. What they found, I couldn't divorce her. She had leverage, threats. I had to be smarter, so I played the fool. I let her think she was winning." Grace looked at Walt. The old man's face was stone. She kept reading. "The will Porter read today was fake. Vivian has a copy, thinks it's real. The real will is in the bunker under this shack, along with $60 million in cash I've been hiding for 3 years, along with proof of what she really is." Grace stopped breathing. The key opens the floor. The code to the vault is your mama's birthday, 041556. Don't let her sell the water rights. Don't let her destroy what 4 generations built. Take her down, baby girl. I taught you to fight. Now fight. Love, Dad. The letter fell from Grace's hand. Walt was already moving, kicking debris away from the corner, exposing a 3-foot square section of floor that looked different from the rest. Newer. The boards fit together in a herringbone pattern with a hole in the center big enough for a finger. Grace pulled the iron key from the manila envelope. It was heavy, old-fashioned, the kind that opened a chest or a cellar. "You gonna open it or just stare at it?" Walt asked. Grace knelt by the floor, inserted the key in the hole and turned. Nothing happened. "Pull," Walt said. She pulled, still nothing. "Twist and pull at the same time." She did. Something clicked deep beneath the floor. A mechanical sound, gears engaging. Then a hiss of hydraulic pressure. The 3-foot square section of floor lifted on pneumatic arms, rising slowly until it stood vertical, revealing a dark square opening and a metal ladder bolted to concrete. Cool air rose from below, carrying the smell of machine oil and filtered air. Grace looked down into darkness. "There's a switch on your right about 10 feet down," Walt said. "Roy showed me once. Never been all the way down myself. He said that was for you." Grace swung her leg over the edge, found the first rung with her boot. "You coming?" she asked. "I'll keep watch up here. Some things are meant to be private." Grace descended. The ladder was solid, professionally installed. She counted rungs, 10, 20, 30. The air grew colder with each step. At 30 feet, her boot touched concrete. She felt along the wall and found the switch. The lights came on in sequence, fluorescent tubes flickering to life one after another, illuminating a space that made Grace's breath catch in her throat. She was standing in a concrete bunker 20 feet by 30 feet. The walls were reinforced, the ceiling low, the air climate controlled. Along the left wall stood a gun safe, tall as a man. Along the right wall, 4 filing cabinets, industrial gray. At the far end, a massive steel vault door, the kind banks used, with an electronic keypad. In the center of the room sat a desk made of glass and steel, 3 computer monitors, a leather office chair, and on the desk, a leather journal and a silver USB drive. Grace walked to the vault door on legs that didn't feel like her own. The keypad glowed green. It read, "Enter code." Her mother's birthday, April 15, 1956. She typed 041556. The keypad beeped, red light, incorrect code. Grace tried again, slower, same result. She closed her eyes, thinking, what had her father written? The code is your mama's birthday. She tried the full date, 04151956. The keypad went dark for 3 seconds. Then every bolt in the vault door retracted with a series of heavy clunks that echoed through the bunker. The door unsealed with a hiss of equalized pressure and swung open on motorized hinges. Grace stepped into the vault. 10 feet by 10 feet, shelves on 3 walls, and on those shelves, stacked floor to ceiling, vacuum-sealed bricks of $100 bills. She reached out and touched one. It was real, solid, heavy. She counted the stacks, did rough math in her head. Each brick maybe 50,000, maybe 100 bricks per shelf, maybe 10 shelves. $60 million. Her father had hidden $60 million under a rotting lined shack in the middle of nowhere. Grace's knees gave out. She sat hard on the concrete floor, staring at the money, and started to laugh. Then she started to cry. Then she did both at once until she couldn't breathe. When she finally pulled herself together, she stood and looked at the rest of the vault. On the bottom shelf, a wooden box. She opened it. Inside, wrapped in velvet, her mother's jewelry. The sapphire necklace Vivian had claimed was lost in a move. The diamond brooch Grace had worn to prom. The wedding ring her mother was buried with, except she wasn't buried with it because here it was. Vivian had stolen it all. Grace closed the box and looked at the shelves on the opposite wall. Document boxes labeled and dated. She pulled one down, opened it. Inside, property deeds, bank statements, investment records. A paper trail of her father systematically liquidating his empire. Selling properties, transferring stocks, converting everything to cash. For 3 years, while Vivian thought she was winning, Roy had been moving every dollar he could away from her reach. Grace closed the document box and walked back to the desk. She picked up the leather journal, opened it to the first page. Property sale log. Columbia Falls rental houses. Sold March 3rd, $400,000 in cash. She flipped through, page after page of sales, liquidations, transfers, her father's careful handwriting documenting the slow dissolution of everything he'd built. On the last page, dated 2 weeks before he died, a final entry. Liquidation complete. $62 million secured. Vivian controls only the shell. The ranch is mortgaged to the foundation. The water company is leveraged to bankruptcy. The bank accounts contain operating capital only. Everything of value is here. Everything that matters goes to Grace. Below that, in heavier ink, as if he'd pressed hard, "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you myself. I'm sorry for the years we lost. But I couldn't risk her finding out. She's watching everything. Everyone. This was the only way to keep you safe and make sure you got what you deserved. Not money, baby girl, justice. The chance to take back what she stole. I love you, Gracie. Always did, always will. Now go get her, Dad." Grace sat in the leather chair, her father's journal in her hands, and cried until she had nothing left. When she finally climbed back up the ladder, the sun had set and stars filled the sky. Walt was sitting on the running board of his truck, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked. Grace nodded. She couldn't speak yet. Walt stood, ground out the cigarette under his boot. "Roy told me something about a month before he died. He said, Walt, if anything happens to me, you make sure Grace gets to that shack. You make sure she opens that floor. And when she does, you tell her one thing." Walt looked Grace in the eyes. "He said to tell you he never stopped believing in you. He said you were twice the rancher he ever was and 10 times smarter. He said if anyone could take Vivian down, it was you." Grace found her voice. "She killed him, didn't she?" Walt was quiet for a long time. Roy thought so, couldn't prove it, but the way he got sick, the way the doctors couldn't figure it, the way Vivian was always there with his medicine. Walt shook his head. "Your daddy was a lot of things, but he wasn't paranoid. If he thought she poisoned him, she probably did." Grace looked back at the shack, at the open hatch in the floor, at the fortune hidden beneath worthless wood and rotted dreams. "There's a USB drive down there," she said. "Did he tell you what's on it?" "Said it was for your eyes only. Said it would tell you everything you need to know." Grace walked to her truck, pulled out her laptop, walked back to the hatch. Walt followed her down the ladder. In the bunker, Grace plugged the USB drive into the computer. The monitors came to life. No password, no security, just a single video file on the desktop. She clicked it. Her father appeared on screen, sitting at this very desk. The timestamp read 3 weeks before his death. He looked thinner than Grace remembered, his skin pale, his eyes shadowed, but his gaze was sharp, focused. "Grace," the video Roy said, and hearing his voice again broke something in her. "If you're watching this, I'm dead and the vultures have picked my bones clean." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this in person. I couldn't risk them finding out. Vivian monitors everything. Phone calls, mail, visitors. She's been isolating me for 3 years, and I let her because I needed time to move the assets, time to build the case, time to make sure you'd be protected." Roy rubbed his face with both hands. 3 years ago, I hired a private investigator to look into Vivian's background. What he found, baby girl, it's worse than I thought. Her real name is Vivian Hale. She's still married to a man named Marcus Hale. Gambler, con artist, wanted in 2 states. They married in Las Vegas in 2015. She told him she'd file for divorce in Mexico. She never did. Grace felt her stomach drop. "That means our marriage was void from the start. Everything I left her in that will, she has no legal claim to any of it. Not 1 acre, not $1. Roy pulled a file folder into frame, opened it. In the filing cabinets you'll find copies of everything. Marriage certificate between Vivian and Marcus. No divorce papers because they don't exist. Her real identity, his criminal record, it's all there." He closed the folder and looked directly at the camera. "But that's not the worst of it, Gracie. 6 months ago I started getting sick. Doctors called it heart failure, stress, old age, but it didn't feel right. The symptoms came and went. Always worse after Vivian brought me my medication. I started keeping a journal documenting everything. When I had energy, when I was sick, what I ate, what pills I took." Roy's hand shook slightly. "I think she's poisoning me. I can't prove it, but I know. I can feel it. She's killing me slowly enough that no one will question it." Grace's hand covered her mouth. "I've documented everything in the files. Symptoms, timeline. She always picks up my prescriptions, always insists on giving me my pills herself. I don't have proof, but if I'm dead by the time you see this, demand an autopsy, test for heavy metals, arsenic, whatever slow poison a smart woman would use." Roy leaned back in the chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. "There's more in the files. Proof she's been embezzling from ranch accounts, forging my signature on deals. She's already negotiated a $500 million contract with Nestle to sell the water rights. Not just our water, Gracie. The whole valley's water. 23 ranching families downstream depend on that aquifer. If she sells to Nestle, they'll pump it dry in 15 years. Everything will die." His voice hardened. "Don't let her do it. The real will is in cabinet 2, top drawer. It leaves everything to you. The ranch, the water rights, everything. The will Porter read was a forgery. I signed it because Vivian threatened to destroy the ranch if I didn't, but I told Porter to bury it. The real will is ironclad. Multiple witnesses, video recording of the signing. She can't fight it." Roy stood, walked closer to the camera. "I love you, baby girl. I'm sorry I wasted 8 years being stubborn. Your mama would be so proud of who you've become. You're strong. You're smart. You're everything I hoped you'd be. Now I need you to be one more thing. I need you to be ruthless. Take Vivian down. Protect the water, protect the valley, protect our legacy." He reached toward the camera. "Give her hell, Gracie." The screen went black. Grace sat in the silence of the bunker for a long time. Walt stood behind her, hand on her shoulder. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. Grace stood. She looked at the vault full of money, the filing cabinets full of evidence, the computer full of secrets. Her father had given her everything she needed to destroy Vivian Cross. Not just money, not just proof. He'd given her purpose. "I want to go back to the ranch," Grace said, voice steady as stone. "I want to look Vivian in the eye and I want to watch her face when she realizes she didn't win." Walt smiled. It was not a kind smile. "That's Roy's daughter talking." Grace walked to the filing cabinet, pulled out the top drawer, and found the real will. Signed, witnessed, notarized, dated 6 months before her father's death. Last will and testament of Roy Edward Mackenzie. I leave my entire estate, including all real property, personal property, water rights, and business interests, to my daughter, Grace Marie Mackenzie. Simple, clear, unbreakable. She folded it carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. Then she heard something that made her blood freeze. From above, through the open hatch, the sound of an engine, the crunch of tires on gravel. Walt moved fast for a man his age. He climbed the ladder, looked out, came back down. "Black Escalade," he said quietly. "Vivian just pulled up. She's got Dylan and 2 men I don't recognize." Grace felt her heart hammering. "How did she find me?" "Doesn't matter. Question is, what do we do now?" Grace looked around the bunker, at the money, at the evidence, at the computer still showing her father's face frozen on the screen. "Can we close the hatch from down here?" Walt shook his head. "Has to be closed from above, and if we go up there she'll know something's here." From above, Vivian's voice, sharp and clear. "Grace, I know you're in there somewhere. We need to talk." Grace made a decision. "Stay here, guard the bunker, don't let anyone down." "What are you gonna do?" "What my father taught me, I'm gonna bluff." She climbed the ladder fast, emerged from the hatch into the dark shack, and stepped outside into the headlights of Vivian's Escalade. The older woman stood beside her vehicle, arms crossed, flanked by 2 large men in dark suits. Dylan leaned against the hood, watching with something that might have been curiosity or might have been fear. "Well," Vivian said, looking Grace up and down, "you actually came. I'm surprised. Most people would have just sold the land sight unseen." Grace walked forward until she was 10 feet away. "What do you want, Vivian?" "I want to make this easy for both of us." Vivian pulled a folded check from her purse. $50,000 for this shack and the 40 acres. You sign a quitclaim deed, take the money, and go back to whatever life you had in Billings. Clean, simple, everyone's happy." "Why do you want this land?" Vivian's smile was cold. "Does it matter? It's worthless to you. To me, it's worth 50,000. That's generous considering you got it for free." Dylan spoke up. "Mom's selling water rights to Nestle. They need access across your property to reach the aquifer. Pipeline easement." Vivian's head snapped toward her son. "Shut your mouth." But Dylan kept talking, and Grace saw something in his eyes, something that looked like rebellion. "The deal's worth 500 million, but if you don't sell, the whole thing falls apart. Nestle needs your land to make it work." Vivian stepped toward Dylan, hand raised like she might hit him, then stopped herself. She turned back to Grace. "Fine, you want the truth? Yes, I'm selling water rights. It's business, Grace. Something your father never understood. He was sentimental about this land, about the water, about legacy. I'm practical. $500 million is more practical than a bunch of cows and nostalgia." Grace felt rage building in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "What about the ranchers downstream, the families who depend on that water?" "Not my problem. They can buy water like everyone else." "My father would never have allowed this." Vivian laughed, sharp and cruel. "Your father is dead, sweetheart, and he left me in charge. He left you a pile of wood. So take the money, sign the paper, and get out of my way." Grace met her eyes. "No." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Vivian's expression went flat. "What did you say?" "I said no. I'm not selling, not for 50,000, not for 500 million. This land is mine. My father left it to me, and you can't have it." Vivian turned to the two men. "Search the shack." They started forward. Grace didn't move. Then Walt appeared in the doorway behind her, shotgun cradled in his arms. Not pointing it, not threatening, just there. "That be trespassing, ma'am," Walt said quietly. Vivian's eyes narrowed. "You're fired, Walter. Get off Mackenzie property." "This isn't Mackenzie property," Walt said. "This is Grace's property, and I work for her now." One of the suited men put his hand inside his jacket. Walt's shotgun came up an inch, just enough. The man stopped. Vivian stared at Grace for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was ice. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life. That shack is structurally unsound. I'll have the county condemn it by the end of the week. You'll be lucky if you're not arrested for trespassing on county land." She got back in the Escalade. Dylan hesitated, looked at Grace like he wanted to say something, then followed his mother. As the vehicle pulled away, kicking up dust and gravel, Vivian leaned out the window. "Enjoy your inheritance, Grace, all 40 worthless acres of it." The Escalade disappeared down the mountain. Walt lowered the shotgun. "Well," he said, "that went about as bad as it could." Grace was shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from rage, from something she hadn't felt in 8 years. "Purpose?" "She's going to come after me," Grace said. "She's going to try to take this land." "Yep." "We need to move fast." "Yep." Grace turned and looked at the shack, at the hidden bunker beneath it, at the fortune and the evidence and the truth her father had left her. "Tomorrow we go to Billings," she said. "We find a lawyer, we file to contest the will, and we start digging into Vivian's past." Walt nodded. "Roy said you were smart. Guess he was right." Grace walked back to the hatch, looked down into the bunker one more time. Her father's face was still frozen on the computer screen. "I won't let you down, Dad," she whispered. Then she and Walt closed the hatch, covered it with debris, and spent the night in their trucks on the ridge, taking turns keeping watch. Because the war had begun. And Grace Mackenzie had 60 million reasons to win. The drive back to Billings took Grace and Walt 3 hours through darkness so complete it felt like driving through ink. Grace's mind wouldn't stop racing. $60 million, evidence of bigamy, proof of embezzlement, her father's voice on that video telling her to fight. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. They reached the city limits just before midnight. Walt followed her truck to a motel off the interstate, paid cash for 2 rooms, and told her to get some sleep. Grace lay in bed staring at the ceiling until dawn. At 8 in the morning, she was sitting in the parking lot outside Porter and Associates, waiting for the office to open. Walt brought coffee from the gas station across the street. It tasted like motor oil, but Grace drank it anyway. At 8:30, Samuel Porter pulled into his reserved space in a silver Lexus. He saw Grace's truck, saw her standing beside it, and his face went pale. He walked toward her slowly, briefcase clutched to his chest like a shield. "Grace," he said, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you about my father's will." Porter looked around the empty parking lot, then at Walt standing beside Grace with his arms crossed. "I can't discuss client matters in a parking lot." "Then let's go inside." Porter hesitated, then nodded. He unlocked the office and led them upstairs to the same conference room where he'd read the will 2 days ago. The room still smelled like furniture polish and old paper. Porter set his briefcase on the table, but didn't open it. "What do you want, Grace?" "The truth." Grace pulled the letter from her jacket and set it on the table. "My father wrote this 3 weeks before he died. He said the will you read was fake." Porter's hand trembled as he reached for the letter. He read it, then set it down carefully like it might explode. "I can't talk about this." "Why not?" "Because Vivian will destroy me. She'll have my license. She'll ruin my practice. He stopped, swallowed hard. "She's threatened my family, Grace." Walt stepped forward. "Roy Mackenzie was your friend for 30 years. He trusted you, died trusting you." Porter looked at Walt, then at Grace. Something broke behind his eyes. "I know," he whispered. "God help me, I know." He walked to the window, stared out at the street below. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "Roy came to me 6 months before he died. He brought 2 wills. The first one left everything to you, Grace, everything. Properly witnessed, properly executed, ironclad. He made me watch him sign it, made me video record it, told me it was the real will." Grace felt her heart pounding. "And the second will?" "He brought that 1 month later, already signed, the one that left everything to Vivian. He said she'd forced him to sign it, threatened to destroy the ranch if he didn't. He told me to read that one at the probate hearing, but to keep the real one safe." Porter turned from the window. "He said when the time was right, when Vivian showed her true colors, I should give it to you." "Where is it?" Porter walked to a wooden cabinet in the corner of the office, pulled out a key, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, sealed in a fireproof envelope, was a document. He placed it on the table in front of Grace. "Last will and testament of Roy Edward Mackenzie." Grace opened it with shaking hands. The language was clear and simple. "I leave my entire estate, including all real property, business interests, livestock, equipment, and water rights, to my daughter Grace Marie Mackenzie. I leave nothing to my wife Vivian Cross, as our marriage was entered into under false pretenses, and I believe her intentions toward me to be malicious." It was dated 6 months before his death, signed by Roy, witnessed by 2 people Grace didn't know, notarized with an official seal. "This supersedes the other will," Porter said quietly. "It's later, it's valid, and it explicitly revokes all prior wills." "Then why did you read the fake one?" "Because Roy told me to. He said Vivian needed to think she'd won, needed to feel safe. He said you'd know what to do when the time came." Porter sat down heavily. "I've been waiting for you to come back, hoping you'd figure it out." Grace looked at the will, then at Porter. "Will you testify to this, in court?" "If it means stopping Vivian. Yes, I should have stopped her 2 days ago. I was a coward. I'm done being a coward." Walt put a hand on Porter's shoulder. "Roy would be proud." Grace carefully folded the will and put it in her jacket pocket next to her father's letter. "I need a lawyer," she said. "Someone who can fight Vivian's legal team, someone who isn't afraid of her." Porter actually smiled. "I know just the man." Hank Rawlings' office sat above a feed store on the outskirts of Billings, accessed by an outdoor staircase that creaked under their weight. The door had a frosted glass window with gold lettering that read Rawlings Law, and beneath it in smaller letters, Criminal Defense and Lost Causes. Porter knocked. A voice from inside shouted to come in. The office was a single room that smelled like cigar smoke and old books. A scarred wooden desk sat beneath a window overlooking the parking lot. Behind the desk sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and left out in the weather for 60 years. Hank Rawlings was tall even sitting down, white-haired, with a face like weathered leather and eyes the color of gunmetal. He wore jeans, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a bolo tie with a turquoise stone. A half-smoked cigar smoldered in an ashtray beside his coffee mug. He looked at Porter, then at Grace and Walt, then back at Porter. "Sam," he said, "you bringing me clients now. This is Grace Mackenzie, Roy Mackenzie's daughter." Hank's expression changed. He stood, extended his hand. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for your loss. Roy was a good man." Grace shook his hand. His grip was firm, calloused. "Thank you. Mr. Porter said you might be able to help me." "Call me Hank, everyone does." He gestured to the chairs facing his desk. "Sit, tell me what you need." Grace sat and told him everything. The will reading, the line shack, the bunker, the money, her father's video, Vivian's bigamy, the Nestle deal, all of it. Hank listened without interrupting, occasionally relighting his cigar, his eyes never leaving Grace's face. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who'd just been handed a fight worth having. "So let me make sure I understand," Hank said. "Your stepmother is a bigamist who married your father while still legally married to another man, which means her marriage to your father was void, which means she has no legal claim to his estate. She's also been embezzling, forging documents, and possibly murdered your father with poison. And she's trying to sell water rights worth $500 million that she doesn't actually own." "That's correct. And you have $60 million in cash, the real will and evidence of all of it." "Yes." Hank relit his cigar, took a long pull, and blew smoke toward the ceiling. "Miss Mackenzie, I haven't had a case this good since they disbarred me in California." Grace blinked. "You were disbarred." "Punched a prosecutor who called my client a liar. Client was innocent, by the way. Prosecutor was dirty. Got my license back 5 years later, but they wouldn't let me practice in California anymore. Came to Montana, passed the bar here, been taking cases everyone else is too scared to touch." He grinned. "Your case is exactly the kind of impossible fight I live for." "Can you win?" "Sweetheart, with what you just told me, I could win this case drunk and blindfolded. The question isn't can we win. The question is how fast and how publicly do you want to destroy her?" Grace met his eyes. "Fast, public, complete." Hank slapped his desk. "Then let's get to work." They spent the next 3 hours planning strategy. Hank made phone calls, pulled up statutes on his computer, scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad. The plan was simple. File an emergency petition to freeze the estate. Prove Vivian's marriage to Roy was void due to existing marriage. Enter the real will into probate. Demand an autopsy to investigate cause of death. And stop the Nestle deal before it could close. But first, they needed to find Marcus Hale. Hank had a private investigator on retainer, a former cop named Eddie Chen who'd left the force rather than take bribes from the cattle-rustling operations up north. Eddie made some calls. By evening, he had an address. Marcus Hale was living in Reno, Nevada, working as a professional poker player and occasionally running small cons on tourists. He had warrants in 2 states for fraud and bad checks. He'd been married to Vivian for 11 years and had no idea she'd remarried. Hank called the number Eddie provided. It rang 6 times before a man answered. "Yeah." "Marcus Hale." "Who's asking?" "My name is Hank Rawlings. I'm an attorney representing Grace Mackenzie. I'd like to talk to you about your wife, Vivian." There was a long silence. Then Marcus laughed a bitter sound. That bitch isn't my wife anymore. She left me 7 years ago, said she'd handle the divorce in Mexico. Did you ever sign divorce papers? She said she'd take care of it. I believed her. Mr. Hale, I have reason to believe there was no divorce, which means you're still legally married to Vivian. Another long silence. What does that mean? It means Vivian committed bigamy when she married Roy Mackenzie. It means her second marriage was void. And it means she has no legal claim to the $40 million estate she's trying to inherit. Marcus was quiet for so long Hank thought he'd hung up. Mr. Hale. I'm here just thinking. Another pause. What do you want from me? Testimony. You fly to Montana, you testify that you never divorced Vivian, and you help us prove she's a fraud. What's in it for me? Hank looked at Grace. She nodded. $50,000. Cash, plus immunity from prosecution and witness protection if you need it. Marcus whistled. Who's paying that? Miss Mackenzie. Roy's daughter, the one Vivian always said was a spoiled brat who abandoned her old man. Grace's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level when Hank put the call on speaker. That's me, Grace said, and everything Vivian told you was a lie, just like she lied about the divorce. Marcus was quiet again. Tell me something, he said. Is Vivian going down hard for this? As hard as we can make it, Grace said. Marcus laughed. Then I'm in. When do you need me? 2 days later, Marcus Hale stepped off a Southwest flight at Billings Logan International Airport wearing a cheap suit, gold chains, and cologne that could strip paint. He was 48 years old, medium height, with slicked back hair going gray at the temples and the kind of smile that made you check your wallet. Grace and Hank met him at baggage claim. Marcus spotted them immediately, probably because Hank looked exactly like what he was, a cowboy lawyer, and Grace looked exactly like what she was, a rancher's daughter who hadn't slept in days. You must be Miss Mackenzie, Marcus said, extending his hand. I can see Roy in your face. Good man, your old man. I'm sorry Vive killed him. Grace froze. You know she killed him. Of course I know. She told me her plan 7 years ago. Said she was gonna marry a rich old cowboy, wait for him to die, then split the money with me. Marcus picked up his battered duffel bag. When I didn't hear from her for 2 years, I figured she'd cut me out. Didn't figure she'd actually murder the guy, though. That's cold even for Vivian. They drove to Hank's office in Hank's truck, Marcus riding in the back seat, talking nonstop. Met Vive in Las Vegas. She was working as a cocktail waitress at the Bellagio. Smart, beautiful, knew how to work a room. We hit it off, got married on a Tuesday, spent the next 3 years running cons together. Small stuff mostly. Credit card scams, fake charity fundraisers. She was good. Really good. Then one day she tells me she met a Mark, some rich cattle rancher from Montana. Says she's gonna marry him, take him for everything, come back to Vegas rich. And you were okay with that? Grace asked. Marcus shrugged. It was business. I figured we'd split the money and retire somewhere warm, but she never came back, never called, never sent a dime. I waited a year, then figured she'd screwed me over. He lit a cigarette. Hearing that she's about to inherit $40 million and I might still be legally married to her, that's the best news I've had in 7 years. They spent the afternoon preparing Marcus to testify. Hank had him write out a timeline, document everywhere he and Vivian had lived, provide copies of their marriage license. Marcus was surprisingly cooperative. When Hank asked why, he grinned. Because Vivian made me feel like an idiot for 7 years. Now I get to return the favor. That evening, Grace put Marcus up in a hotel under a fake name, paid cash for the room, and hired 2 private security guards to keep watch. Vivian couldn't know Marcus was in Montana. Not yet. Grace went back to her own motel room and tried to sleep but couldn't. Her phone buzzed at 10 p.m. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at the old grain elevator on Highway 3. Midnight. Come alone, Dylan." Grace stared at the message. Dylan, Vivian's son. The one who told her about the Nestle deal even though his mother didn't want him to. She should ignore it. Should call Hank. Should definitely not meet Dylan Cross alone at midnight in an abandoned building. She texted back one word. "Okay." The grain elevator rose against the night sky like a concrete cathedral, 6 massive silos connected by a maze of conveyors and loading chutes. It had been abandoned for 20 years, windows broken out, graffiti covering the lower walls. Grace pulled into the dirt lot at 11:50 and waited. At exactly midnight, headlights appeared. A BMW, Dylan's car. He parked 50 feet away, killed the engine, stepped out. Dylan Cross looked different than he had at the funeral. Less hungover, more scared. He wore jeans and a hoodie, hands shoved in his pockets, looking around nervously. Grace got out of her truck. She'd left Walt back at the motel, but she had pepper spray in her pocket and her phone recording in her jacket. "Why did you ask me here?" she called. Dylan walked closer but stopped 10 feet away. "Because I need your help, and you need mine." "I don't need anything from you." "Yes, you do. You need to know who Vivian really is, what she's really done, and I'm the only one who can tell you." Grace watched him carefully. "Talk." Dylan pulled out his phone, scrolled through files, held it up so she could see the screen. "I've been recording Vivian for 3 years. Every conversation I could, every phone call when she thought I wasn't listening. I've got hours of her talking about forging documents, bribing officials, planning to sell the water rights." He scrolled further. "And I've got her talking about how she killed your father." Grace felt her blood go cold. "Play it." Dylan tapped the screen. Vivian's voice came through the speaker, clear and sharp. "Roy's getting too suspicious. He's asking questions about the bank accounts. We need to move the timeline up, increase the dosage." A man's voice Grace didn't recognize responded. "How much more?" "Double it. I want him dead in 2 weeks." The recording ended. Grace couldn't breathe. "When was that?" "3 weeks before your father died." Dylan scrolled to another file. "I've got 20 more like it. Her talking to the mine foreman about covering up contamination. Her talking to Sheriff Doyle about looking the other way. Her talking to Judge Morrison about fast-tracking permits." "Why are you giving me this?" Dylan's face twisted, with something between anger and grief. "Because Vivian isn't my mother. She's my prison." He told Grace the story. How his real mother, Natalie Pierce, had married Vivian's brother Gary Cross back in 2006. How Gary died in a car accident in 2012, when Dylan was just 12 years old. How Vivian took custody of Dylan, became the trustee of his inheritance from Gary. "My mom, Natalie, she died 2 years later. Pills. They called it an overdose, but I know Vivian had something to do with it. I've been trapped with that woman for 12 years. She controls my trust fund. She threatens to frame me for crimes if I try to leave. She's made me complicit in everything she's done." His voice broke. "When your dad died, I knew she killed him. Same way she killed Gary. Same way she killed my mom. I started recording everything, waiting for someone to fight back. When you refused to sell the land, I knew you were that person." Grace studied his face in the dim light. "How do I know this isn't a trap?" "Because I'm giving you everything." Dylan held out his phone. "Every recording, every file, all of it. You take Vivian down, you get me immunity, and I'll testify to everything I know." Grace took the phone. The screen showed dozens of audio files, each labeled with dates and names. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I saw you at the funeral. You were the only person crying. Everyone else was there for show, but you actually loved him." Dylan's eyes were wet. "I never got to love my real parents. Vivian took that from me. Don't let her take anything else from anyone." Grace looked at the phone in her hand. Hours of recordings, proof of everything. Dylan was either the best actor she'd ever seen or he was telling the truth. She made a decision. "I'll need to verify these recordings, and you'll need to meet with my lawyer." "Whatever it takes." Grace pulled out her own phone and texted Hank. "Have major development. Dylan Cross just turned. Has recordings of Vivian confessing to murder." Hank's response came back immediately. "Bring him in, now." They drove in separate vehicles to Hank's office. The lawyer was waiting on the stairs, still wearing the same clothes from earlier, cigar in hand. He listened to 3 of Dylan's recordings, and his expression went from skeptical to amazed to hungry. "Son," Hank said when the 3rd recording finished, "you just became the star witness in the biggest case this county has seen in 50 years." They spent the next 4 hours going through every file on Dylan's phone. Hank made copies, had them notarized by a judge he woke up at 2 in the morning, and filed them in a safe deposit box at 3 different banks. At dawn, Hank laid out the new strategy. They would file emergency motions in the morning, freeze Vivian's access to all ranch accounts, demand immediate probate hearing to contest the will, enter Marcus's testimony about the bigamy, enter Dylan's recordings as evidence of fraud and murder, and request an emergency exhumation order for Roy's body to conduct a full autopsy, including heavy metal testing. "This is going to get ugly," Hank warned. "Vivian will fight back hard. She'll come after all of us." "Let her come," Grace said. At 9 a.m., Hank filed the motions at the Yellowstone County Courthouse. By 10 a.m., the local news had picked up the story. Cattle baron's daughter contests will, claims stepmother is bigamist. By noon, Vivian's lawyers had responded with their own emergency motion. They filed to have Grace's petition dismissed, claimed Dylan's recordings were illegally obtained, and accused Grace of elder abuse for spreading malicious rumors about her stepmother. But they also did something else. They filed an emergency motion to demolish the Line Shack at Crow's Nest Ridge, claiming it was structurally unsound and posed an environmental hazard. Judge Timothy Hammond, a local judge who'd been in Vivian's pocket for years, approved the demolition order. Grace had 72 hours to vacate the property before it would be bulldozed. Grace read the order in Hank's office and felt rage burning in her chest. She's trying to destroy the bunker. If she demolishes that shack, she'll find the evidence. Then we stop her, Hank said. He filed an immediate appeal to district court, requesting a stay of the demolition order. The district judge, a woman named Samantha Reeves who had a reputation for fairness, agreed to hear arguments the next morning. But that night, something happened that changed everything. Grace, Walt, Marcus, and Dylan were all staying at the same motel, different rooms but closed together. Hank had hired security to watch the parking lot. Grace felt safe enough to sleep for the first time in days. At 2 a.m., the fire alarm went off. Grace bolted awake, grabbed her jacket and phone, and ran into the hallway. Smoke was pouring from under the door of Marcus's room. Other guests were evacuating, streaming toward the stairs. Walt appeared from his room, still pulling on his boots. "Where's Marcus?" They ran to his door. It was locked. Walt kicked it once, twice, the frame splintered and gave way. Inside, the room was filled with smoke but no flames. A smoke machine, Grace realized. Someone had set off a smoke machine to trigger the alarm. Marcus lay on the floor beside the bed, bleeding from his shoulder. His eyes were open, shocked, staring at the ceiling. "Call 911, Grace screamed. She dropped to her knees beside Marcus, pressed her hands over the wound. Blood pumped between her fingers, hot and dark. Marcus looked at her, tried to speak. She found me. Don't talk, help is coming." Walt was on the phone with the dispatcher. Dylan appeared in the doorway, saw Marcus, went pale. "Oh my God." The security guard Hank had hired came running in, gun drawn. "What happened?" "Someone shot him," Grace said. "Where were you?" The guard looked sick. "I was doing a perimeter check. Heard the alarm, came running. Must have happened while I was out back." Sirens in the distance, getting closer. Grace kept pressure on Marcus's wound, kept talking to him, kept him conscious until the paramedics arrived. They loaded him onto a stretcher, started an IV, rushed him to the ambulance. Grace climbed in with him. "I'm not leaving him." At the hospital, doctors rushed Marcus into surgery. Grace sat in the waiting room, covered in his blood, shaking. Walt brought her coffee. Dylan sat in the corner, silent. Hank arrived 20 minutes later, still in his pajamas, looking furious. "Sheriff's department is calling it a robbery gone wrong. Some junkie broke in looking for cash." "That's bullshit," Grace said. "This was Vivian." "I know, but proving it is another matter." The surgeon came out 3 hours later. Marcus had survived. The bullet had gone through his shoulder, missed major arteries, shattered his collarbone, but nothing vital. He'd need surgery to repair the bone, but he'd live. "He's asking for you," the surgeon told Grace. She went into the recovery room. Marcus was pale, hooked up to monitors and IVs, but his eyes were clear. "Hey," he said, voice hoarse, "I'm still alive." "Who shot you?" "I don't know, never saw them. Just heard the window break, felt the impact, then nothing." He tried to sit up and winced. "But I know who sent them." "Vivian." "Has to be. She must have found out I was here." He looked at Grace with something like respect. "You Mackenzies don't give up, do you?" "Not when someone tries to kill our witnesses." Marcus smiled. "Good, because I'm still testifying. Screw that bitch. She can't kill me and she can't scare me. I'm going to stand up in court and tell everyone what she is." Grace felt something loosen in her chest. Relief, gratitude, and something like kinship with this broken con man who'd been used by Vivian just like her father had been. "Thank you," she said. "Thank your dad. He's the one who gave you the guts to fight. I'm just along for the ride." Grace left the hospital as the sun was rising. Hank was waiting in the parking lot, phone to his ear. When he saw her, he hung up and walked over. "I just got word from the district court. Judge Reeves granted the stay. Demolition is postponed pending a full hearing." Grace nodded, too tired to feel victorious. "What about Vivian? Can we prove she ordered the shooting?" "Not yet, but we don't need to. We already have enough to destroy her in probate court." Hank looked at the hospital behind them. "And now she's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes." Grace turned and looked east, toward the mountains, toward Crow's Nest Ridge where her father had hidden his fortune and his truth. "Then let's make sure her next mistake is her last." They drove back to the motel as the sun climbed over the Beartooth Mountains. painting the sky the color of blood and gold. Grace's phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. Just heard from old friend who works for Vivian's lawyers. She's filing for immediate hearing, trying to close Nestle deal before you can stop her. Hearing is in 5 days. 5 days, that's all they had. Grace texted back. Then we'd better be ready. She looked at Walt in the passenger seat. We're going to need the evidence from the bunker. All of it. Can you get back to Crow's Nest, secure everything, bring it to Billings? Walt nodded. Already planning on it. I'll take 2 of Hank's security guys, load up everything we can carry. Be careful. If Vivian knows about Marcus, she might know about the bunker. Let her try, Walt said grimly. I've been waiting 40 years to finish a fight. This'll do. At the motel, Grace showered, washing Marcus's blood off her hands. She watched it swirl down the drain, dark red turning pink, turning clear. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then she did. Grace Mackenzie. Yes. This is Elizabeth Tate. I was a nurse at St. Vincent Hospital when your father was being treated. I need to talk to you about the day he died. Grace's hand tightened on the phone. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you meet me? There's a diner on 27th Street, noon today. Come alone. Why should I trust you? Because I have something that proves Vivian murdered your father. And if I don't give it to someone soon, I'm afraid she'll kill me too. The line went dead. Grace sat on the edge of the motel bed, phone in her hand, heart pounding. Another witness, another piece of the puzzle. And 5 days until the hearing that would decide everything. She stood, got dressed, and headed for the diner. She'd gone too far to stop now, and her father hadn't raised a quitter. Grace Mackenzie was Roy's daughter, and she was going to finish what he started. The diner on 27th Street was the kind of place that had been serving the same menu since 1975. Vinyl booths, checkered floor, a counter with red swivel stools. The smell of coffee and grease hung in the air thick enough to taste. Grace arrived 10 minutes early and took a booth in the back corner where she could see the door. She ordered coffee, she didn't drink, and waited. At 12:03, a woman walked in. Early 60s, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing scrubs under a winter coat. She had the look of someone who'd spent 40 years on her feet in hospital corridors. Tired eyes, careful hands, the weight of too many secrets. The woman scanned the diner, spotted Grace, and walked over. Grace Mackenzie. Elizabeth Tate. The woman nodded and slid into the booth across from Grace. She didn't take off her coat. She kept her purse clutched in her lap like it contained something precious or dangerous. A waitress came over. Elizabeth ordered coffee, black. When the waitress left, Elizabeth leaned forward and spoke quietly. I was a hospice nurse for 26 years, retired 3 years ago. But before I retired, I worked at St. Vincent. I was assigned to your mother during her final month. Grace felt her throat tighten. You knew my mother. Sarah, yes, beautiful woman, strong. Even at the end, she was strong. Elizabeth's eyes were wet. She died of pancreatic cancer, fast, aggressive, nothing the doctors could do. I know, I was there. Were you there when Vivian Cross was administering her medication? Grace went still. Elizabeth continued, voice barely above a whisper. Vivian was a hospital administrator at the time. She wasn't supposed to be handling patient care, but she insisted on personally managing your mother's pain medication. Said she wanted to help. Your father was grateful. He was falling apart watching his wife die. He didn't see what I saw. What did you see? I saw Vivian going into your mother's room alone. I saw her adjusting the morphine drip when she thought no one was watching, and I saw your mother getting worse faster than she should have." Elizabeth pulled a tissue from her purse, dabbed her eyes. "Your mother told me something 3 days before she died. She said Vivian was poisoning her, mixing something with the morphine, making her sicker." Grace couldn't breathe. "I thought it was delirium," Elizabeth said. "Cancer patients near the end, sometimes they get confused, see things that aren't there. But Sarah," she grabbed my hand, looked me right in the eye and said, "that woman is killing me. She wants Roy. She's speeding this up so she can have him." I told her she needed to rest. I told her it was just the pain talking. Elizabeth's hand shook as she opened her purse and pulled out a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. "But I kept a sample from the morphine bag that night. I don't know why. Maybe because something in Sarah's eyes told me she was telling the truth. Maybe because I'd seen Vivian around the hospital and something about her felt wrong. I kept it for 8 years, hidden in my bathroom cabinet. Last year, after I heard Roy Mackenzie died suddenly, I had it tested." She pushed the vial across the table. "Compound 7. It's an industrial chemical used in mining operations. Tasteless, odorless, dissolves completely in liquid. In high doses it causes organ failure. In low doses administered over time, it mimics the symptoms of cancer progression. Your mother didn't die of cancer, Grace. The cancer was killing her, but Vivian made sure it killed her faster." Grace picked up the vial with trembling hands. The liquid inside caught the fluorescent light, perfectly clear, perfectly innocent looking. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because when Roy died, I knew Vivian had done it again. Same pattern, same symptoms, same sudden decline. I called the medical examiner's office, tried to report it, but they said without evidence of foul play, they couldn't order an autopsy." Elizabeth leaned forward. "But you can, you're his daughter. You can demand they exhume the body, and when they test his tissues, they'll find the same thing that's in that vial." Grace looked at the vial, then at Elizabeth. "Why didn't you come forward 8 years ago?" Elizabeth's face crumpled. "Because Vivian threatened my grandchildren. 2 weeks after your mother died, Vivian came to my house. Said she knew I'd been asking questions. Said if I ever mentioned Sarah's accusations to anyone, my grandkids would have accidents. She was very specific, described where they went to school, what time they got on the bus, what route they walked home." Elizabeth wiped her eyes. "I have 4 grandchildren, Grace. I couldn't risk them, so I stayed quiet. I've carried that guilt for 8 years. "Then why now?" "Because when Roy died, I realized Vivian would never stop. She'll keep killing until someone stops her. And my grandchildren are grown now. One's in college, 2 are in the military, one's married with kids of her own. They're safe." Elizabeth met Grace's eyes. "But Montana isn't safe as long as that woman is free. So I'm giving you this evidence. I'm willing to testify. I'm willing to face whatever comes. Because I can't carry this guilt anymore." Grace closed her hand around the vial. "Thank you." Elizabeth stood, pulled her coat tight. "Your mother was a good woman. She deserved better. Your father deserved better. Make Vivian pay for what she's done." She walked out of the diner, leaving Grace alone with a vial of poison and a fury so deep it felt like drowning. Grace called Hank from the parking lot. He listened to everything, then told her to bring the vial to his office immediately. Within an hour, he'd arranged for it to be tested at a private lab in Bozeman. Within 3 hours, they had confirmation. Compound 7. The same chemical used in copper mining operations. The same chemical that, according to the lab report, would cause symptoms identical to heart failure if administered in small doses over 6 to 9 months. Hank filed an emergency motion for exhumation that afternoon. He included Elizabeth Tate's affidavit, the lab results from the vial, and Roy's own documented symptoms from his medical records. He argued that there was probable cause to believe Roy Mackenzie had been murdered and that an autopsy was necessary to determine cause of death. Judge Samantha Reeves, the district judge who'd granted the stay on the demolition, reviewed the motion and granted it within 2 hours. The exhumation was scheduled for the next morning. Grace stood in the Miles City Cemetery at dawn, watching a backhoe dig into her father's grave. The same grave she'd stood beside 4 days ago, crying. Now she was back, dry-eyed and cold, watching them pull her father's coffin from the earth. Walt stood beside her, silent. Hank stood on her other side, hands in his coat pockets. Behind them, a medical examiner's van waited with its engine running. The backhoe operator worked carefully, respectfully. When the coffin was visible, 4 men with straps lowered themselves into the grave and lifted it out. Grace watched them load her father's coffin into the van. She watched the van drive away toward Billings. She watched the sun rise over the eastern plains, turning the grass gold. "How long for results?" she asked. 48 hours, Hank said. "Maybe less if we're lucky." They weren't lucky. It took 56 hours. Grace spent those hours moving between the motel, Hank's office, and the hospital where Marcus was recovering. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, just drank coffee and waited. On the 3rd day at 2 in the afternoon, Hank's phone rang. He answered, listened, said thank you, and hung up. Then he looked at Grace, with an expression somewhere between rage and satisfaction. "The medical examiner just called. Your father's tissue samples show chronic arsenic poisoning, levels consistent with administration over approximately 8 months. The ME is ruling cause of death as homicide by poisoning." Grace closed her eyes. She'd known, had known since watching her father's video, but hearing it confirmed, hearing it made official, felt like being hit in the chest with a sledgehammer. "The ME is forwarding the report to the county attorney," Hank continued. "They'll open a criminal investigation, and with Elizabeth's vial showing the same compound, they'll have enough to arrest Vivian." "When?" "Soon, but we still have the probate hearing in 2 days. We need to focus on that first. Take away her money, then let the criminal system take away her freedom." Grace opened her eyes. "What about the Nessel deal? Can we stop it?" Hank's expression darkened. "That's the problem. I got a call this morning from their legal team. The deal is structured to close regardless of who owns the property. Vivian signed a contract giving Nessel water rights for 100 years. Even if we prove she doesn't own the ranch, Nessel's claiming they negotiated in good faith and the contract is binding." "That's insane." "That's corporate law. They paid Vivian $200 million up front. The rest comes in payments over time. If we try to void the contract, they'll sue for tortious interference. Could cost us everything." Grace felt panic rising in her chest. "So even if we win the ranch back, Nessel still gets the water?" "Unless we can prove the contract is invalid, which means proving Vivian never had authority to sign it in the first place." Hank pulled out a file folder. "I subpoenaed the contract yesterday. Got a copy this morning. It's bad, Grace. Really bad." He spread the papers on his desk. Grace leaned over and read. "Water rights purchase agreement between Vivian Cross Mackenzie and Aquacorp International, a subsidiary of Nessel Waters North America. The agreement granted Nessel unlimited extraction rights to the aquifer beneath Mackenzie Ranch for 100 years. In exchange, Nessel would pay $500 million, $200 million up front, $300 million in annual installments." The contract included a clause that made Grace's blood run cold. "In the event of ownership dispute or title transfer, Buyer's rights under this agreement remain valid and enforceable against any subsequent owner of the property. They protected themselves, Grace said. Smart lawyers always do. Hank pointed to another clause. But look at this. The contract required Vivian to certify that she had clear title and full authority to convey the water rights. If we can prove she never had legal ownership, the contract is void from the start. How do we prove that fast enough? We prove the bigamy. We prove her marriage to Roy was void, which means she never legally became Mrs. Mackenzie, which means she had no authority to sign anything. Grace straightened. The hearing is in 2 days. Can we get everything ready by then? We have to, because according to this contract, Nestle plans to start drilling operations in 14 days. Once they break ground, stopping them becomes 10 times harder. Grace looked at the contract, at the impossible numbers, at the legal language designed to protect a billion-dollar corporation. My father spent 50 years protecting that water. I'm not letting some corporation steal it in 2 weeks. Hank smiled. Then let's make sure they don't. The next 36 hours were a blur of preparation. Hank filed amended motions. Dylan reviewed his recordings and prepared to testify. Marcus, still in the hospital but improving, practiced his testimony with a court reporter. Walt returned from Crow's Nest Ridge with 2 trucks full of evidence from the bunker: financial records, property deeds, Roy's journals, and the real will, pristine and unassailable. Grace went through it all, organizing, categorizing, building the case like her father had taught her to build a fence. One post at a time, strong, straight, unbreakable. The night before the hearing, she couldn't sleep. She drove out to Crow's Nest Ridge alone, climbed down into the bunker one more time. The space felt different now, less like a secret and more like a sanctuary. This was where her father had planned his final fight, where he'd spent 3 years moving money, gathering evidence, preparing for this moment. Grace sat at his desk and opened his journal to the last page, his handwriting strong and sure. If you're reading this, you're ready. You're strong enough, smart enough, brave enough. I taught you how to fight, Gracie, not with fists, with truth, with evidence, with the law. Vivian thinks she can buy her way out of anything. She thinks money and lawyers can protect her, but she forgot one thing. The law doesn't care how much money you have. It cares about the truth. And you have the truth. Now go use it. Love, Dad. Grace closed the journal and climbed back up to the surface. The stars were out, brilliant and cold. She stood on the ridge and looked west toward the ranch, toward the land her great-great-grandfather had homesteaded in 1892. 4 generations, 134 years, and it all came down to tomorrow. The Yellowstone County Courthouse was packed by 8 a.m. News crews on the steps, reporters calling questions, local ranchers who'd driven in from 50 miles away, wearing their Sunday suits, ready to see justice done. Grace arrived with Hank, Walt, and Dylan. Marcus was being transported from the hospital by ambulance, accompanied by 2 sheriff's deputies. He'd testify from a wheelchair if he had to. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only. Judge Samantha Reeves presided from the bench, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Vivian sat at the plaintiff's table with 3 lawyers from a Denver firm, each wearing suits that cost more than most people's cars. She looked calm, confident, untouchable. That was about to change. Judge Reeves called the court to order. We are here today for an emergency hearing regarding the estate of Roy Edward Mackenzie, deceased. The petitioner, Grace Mackenzie, is contesting the probated will on multiple grounds. Counsel, your opening statements. Vivian's lead attorney stood. His name was Richard Chambers, silver-haired, 60 years old, with the kind of voice that made juries trust him. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of a disgruntled heir attempting to overturn her father's clearly stated wishes. Roy Mackenzie left the bulk of his estate to his wife of 5 years, Vivian Mackenzie. He left his daughter a small parcel of land. While that may seem unfair to Miss Mackenzie, it was Roy's right to distribute his property as he saw fit. We ask the court to uphold the will and dismiss this petition as frivolous." He sat down. Hank stood. He looked every inch the cowboy lawyer in his bolo tie and boots. "Your Honor, this is not a simple case. This is a case of fraud, bigamy, forgery, and murder. The woman sitting at that table is not Vivian Mackenzie. She's Vivian Hale. She was already married when she married Roy Mackenzie, which means her marriage to him was void, which means she has no legal claim to his estate. Furthermore, we will prove that the will her lawyers just cited is a forgery, and that the real will leaves everything to Grace Mackenzie. Finally, we will prove that Vivian Hale poisoned Roy Mackenzie over a period of 8 months, causing his death. This isn't about an unhappy heir, Your Honor. This is about a con artist and a murderer trying to steal a fortune she has no right to." The courtroom erupted. Judge Reeves banged her gavel. "Order, I will have order." The room quieted. "Mr. Rawlings, those are serious allegations. I assume you have evidence." "We do, Your Honor, substantial evidence." "Then let's hear it. Call your first witness." Hank called Samuel Porter to the stand. The lawyer walked to the witness box like a man heading to his own execution. But when he swore to tell the truth, his voice was steady. Hank took him through it step by step. How Roy had brought him 2 wills. How the first will, dated 6 months before Roy's death, left everything to Grace. How the second will, dated 1 month later, left everything to Vivian. How Roy told Porter the second will was signed under duress and to keep the first will safe. "Did Roy Mackenzie tell you why he signed the second will?" Hank asked. "He said Vivian threatened to destroy the ranch if he didn't. She told him she'd file for divorce and trigger clauses that would bankrupt the company. He signed the second will to buy time." "And did he tell you what to do with the real will?" "He said to wait, to read the fake will at probate, and when Grace came looking for the truth, to give her the real one." Hank entered the real will into evidence. Judge Reeves examined it carefully. The signature, the witnesses, the notary seal, all valid. Chambers cross-examined Porter aggressively, tried to make him admit the real will could be the forgery, but Porter held firm. Next, Hank called Marcus Hale. The bailiff wheeled Marcus into the courtroom in a wheelchair, IV pole attached, hospital gown under a borrowed jacket. He looked like hell, but his eyes were sharp. Vivian went pale when she saw him. Marcus raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. Hank established his identity, then asked the critical question. "Mr. Hale, are you married to Vivian Cross?" "Yes, sir. Married her in Las Vegas on August 3rd, 2015. "Did you ever divorce her?" "No, sir. She said she'd handle the divorce in Mexico, told me not to worry about it. I believed her." Hank entered the marriage certificate into evidence. Original copy from Clark County, Nevada, certified and sealed. "Mr. Hale, did Vivian ever discuss her plans with you regarding Roy Mackenzie?" Marcus smiled, cold and bitter. "Oh yeah. She told me the whole thing. Said she was gonna seduce some rich old rancher, marry him, wait for him to die and split the money with me. Said it was the easiest con she'd ever run." "Did she tell you how long she expected to wait?" "Said give it 5 years max. Old guy like that, she figured he'd have a heart attack or something." The courtroom was silent, every eye on Vivian. Chambers tried to destroy Marcus on cross, called him a con artist and a liar, suggested he was making it all up for money. "Isn't it true you're being paid for this testimony?" "Yes, sir, $50,000. "So you're a bought witness?" "I'm a witness telling the truth who happens to be getting paid. There's a difference." Judge Reeves allowed the testimony to stand. Next came Dylan. He walked to the stand slowly, visibly shaking. He wouldn't look at his mother. When he raised his hand to swear the oath, Vivian leaned over and whispered something to her lawyers. All three of them looked worried. Hank questioned Dylan gently, established that he'd lived with Vivian for 11 years, that he'd witnessed her business dealings, that he'd recorded her conversations. "Why did you record her?" "Because I was afraid of her, and I wanted proof of what she was doing in case I ever got the chance to escape." Hank played 3 recordings. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Vivian's voice came through the speakers. First recording, Vivian discussing forging Roy's signature on the Nestle contract. Second recording, Vivian telling someone to increase the dosage, to have Roy dead in 2 weeks. Third recording, Vivian laughing about how Roy was too senile to see what she was doing. By the time the third recording finished, half the courtroom was in tears. The other half looked ready to lynch Vivian on the spot. Chambers objected, claimed the recordings were illegally obtained, but Judge Reeves overruled him. Montana was a one-party consent state. Dylan had every right to record conversations he was part of. Then came the autopsy report. The medical examiner testified via video conference, explained the exhumation, the testing, the results, chronic arsenic poisoning, administration over approximately 8 months, cause of death, homicide. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Finally, Hank called Elizabeth Tate. The former nurse testified about Sarah Mackenzie's final days, about Vivian administering medication, about Sarah's accusations. Then she produced the vial. "I had this tested last year. It contains compound 7, the same chemical found in Roy Mackenzie's tissues." Hank entered the vial and the lab report into evidence. When Elizabeth finished, Judge Reeves called a recess. Grace sat in the hallway, hands shaking, while the judge reviewed the evidence. 30 minutes later, they were called back in. Judge Reeves looked tired, angry, sad. "I have reviewed all evidence presented today. This court finds as follows. First, the marriage between Vivian Cross and Roy Mackenzie is declared void ab initio due to Ms. Cross's existing legal marriage to Marcus Hale. Second, because the marriage was void, Ms. Cross has no standing to inherit under the will read at the initial probate hearing. Third, this court validates the will dated 6 months prior to Roy Mackenzie's death, which leaves his entire estate to his daughter, Grace Mackenzie. Fourth, the will previously probated is determined to be fraudulent." Vivian stood face white. "Your Honor, I object. This is outrageous. I demand." "Sit down, Mrs. Hale." Vivian sat. Judge Reeves continued. "Furthermore, based on evidence of fraud, forgery, and murder, I am referring this matter immediately to the county attorney for criminal prosecution. Bailiff, place Mrs. Hale under arrest." The bailiff moved toward Vivian. She stood, tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The bailiff caught her arm, spun her around, and cuffed her hands behind her back. Vivian screamed. "This is illegal. You can't do this. I have rights. My lawyers will appeal. I'll sue all of you." The bailiff read her Miranda rights as he led her toward the door. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Vivian stopped at the door, looked back at Grace, and her expression was pure hatred. "You think you won. You haven't won anything. Nestle will bury you in lawsuits. The contract is valid. You'll spend the rest of your life in court. Grace stood and met her eyes. Maybe, but you'll spend the rest of yours in prison. The bailiff pulled Vivian through the door. Her screaming faded down the hallway. The courtroom erupted in applause. Ranchers cheering. Reporters rushing for the doors to file their stories. Judge Reeves banged her gavel, but she was smiling. Hank put his hand on Grace's shoulder. We won. Grace nodded. She should feel victorious, should feel relieved, but all she felt was empty. Her father was still dead. Her mother was still dead. Vivian would go to prison, but that wouldn't bring them back. Walt seemed to read her mind. Your daddy would be proud, he said quietly. You did what he asked, you fought, you won. Grace looked around the courtroom, at the ranchers who'd supported her, at Marcus in his wheelchair grinning despite his pain, at Dylan crying with relief, at Hank already gathering papers for the next fight. It's not over, Grace said. We still have to deal with Nestle. One fight at a time, Hank said. Today you got justice. Tomorrow we'll get the water back. They walked out of the courthouse together into the Montana sun. The news crews were waiting, but Grace pushed past them. She'd give statements later. Right now she needed air. She stood on the courthouse steps, looking out at the city, at the mountains beyond, at the endless sky. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your victory. If you want to discuss the water rights contract, my office can meet tomorrow. We may have a solution that works for everyone. James Whitehorse, Tribal Water Cooperative. Grace stared at the message. James Whitehorse, the name from her father's final letter, the man Roy said would help. She texted back, I'll be there. Then she turned to Walt. I need to go back to the bunker. There's one more letter Dad left me, said to open it after the court victory. They drove to Crow's Nest Ridge as the sun set. Grace climbed down into the bunker one last time and found the envelope taped to the bottom of the desk drawer. She opened it. Inside was a deed to a small property in Colorado and a short letter. Gracie, if you're reading this, you won. I knew you would. One more thing, the water rights. Don't sell to Nestle. There's a better way. James Whitehorse runs a tribal water cooperative. I bought back his family's land from the bank years ago. Return it to him. He'll help you protect the valley. The water belongs to the people. Keep it that way. I love you. I'm so proud of you, Dad. Grace held the letter to her chest and finally let herself cry. Not tears of grief, tears of release. She'd done it, finished what her father started, exposed the killer, saved the ranch. Now she just had to save the water. And she knew exactly how to do it. 3 days after Vivian's arrest, Grace stood in the main house of Mackenzie Ranch for the first time in 8 years. The place looked different. Vivian had redecorated, stripping away everything that had made it feel like home. The family photos were gone. Her mother's furniture was gone. Even the smell was different, sterile and expensive instead of coffee and leather and hay. Grace walked through rooms that should have been familiar but felt like a stranger's house. In the office, she found what she was looking for: financial records, bank statements, the truth about what Vivian had done to the ranch. Walt stood in the doorway, watching her sort through papers. How bad is it? He asked. Grace looked up from a stack of loan documents. Bad. Vivian mortgaged everything. The land, the cattle, the equipment. She took out loans against the water company. There's $4 million in debt, Walt. The ranch is bleeding money. Why would she do that if she was planning to inherit everything? Because she wasn't planning to keep it. She was planning to sell the water rights to Nestle, pay off the debt, and pocket the rest. Grace threw down a paper in disgust. She was ransacking the place before Dad's body was even cold. Walt picked up one of the loan documents. What about the hands, the people who work here? Vivian fired anyone loyal to Dad, brought in her own people. Grace stood and walked to the window overlooking the cattle pens. I'm bringing back everyone she fired, starting with you as foreman. I'm already foreman. Now it's official with a raise. Walt smiled. Roy would like that. Grace spent the rest of the day calling back the ranch hands her father had trusted. Most of them agreed to return immediately. By evening, the bunkhouse was full again, and the ranch felt alive for the first time in years. But that night, as Grace sat in her father's office going through more papers, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Miss Mackenzie, this is Gerald Porter from Aquacorp International. I'm calling regarding the water rights contract. Grace's hand tightened on the phone. I'm listening. We understand there's been a change in ownership. We're prepared to honor the contract with you as the new title holder. However, we need to discuss the initial payment of $200 million that was transferred to Mrs. Hale's accounts. Grace's jaw tightened. What about it? The funds were transferred in good faith to the party we believed held legal title to the property. With the recent court ruling voiding Mrs. Hale's claim, we need those funds returned so they can be properly transferred to you as part of the contract fulfillment. Grace felt her anger rising. I'm not honoring that contract. Silence on the other end, then Porter's voice harder. Miss Mackenzie, your stepmother signed a binding agreement. The contract includes a clause stating that ownership changes don't affect its validity. If you refuse to honor it, we'll sue for breach of contract. $500 million in damages plus legal fees. Sue away. That contract was signed by someone who never had legal authority to sign it. Her marriage was void. She never owned the ranch. The contract is worthless. Our legal team disagrees. We acted in good faith. We paid $200 million. We have rights. You paid money to a criminal. That's not my problem. Porter's voice went cold. It will be your problem when we file suit. And regarding the $200 million, our forensic accountants have traced those funds. Mrs. Hale moved the money through multiple accounts, but $70 million is currently frozen by the state as evidence in her criminal case. The remaining $130 million appears to have been spent or hidden. Unless you can locate and return those funds, you'll be named in our civil suit for their recovery. Grace felt her stomach drop. This was more complicated than she'd thought. Let me talk to my lawyer. You have 48 hours. After that we file. Porter hung up. Grace immediately called Hank. He arrived at the ranch within an hour, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents. Tell me everything, he said. Grace explained the call. Hank listened, making notes, his expression growing darker. This is a problem, he said finally. Nestle paid $200 million to Vivian. That money is traceable. $70 million is in evidence lockup, but the rest is gone. If we can't produce it, Nestle can argue you're unjustly enriched if you keep the property without honoring their contract or returning their payment. But I don't have their money. Vivian spent it. I know, but legally you stepped into ownership of an estate that received $200 million under a contract. That creates liability. Hank pulled out a document. I've been reviewing the Nestle contract. It's actually worse than I thought. Look at this clause. He pointed to a section of dense legal text. In the event the seller is unable to convey clear title or breaches material terms, the buyer may elect to pursue specific performance. Seek monetary damages equal to the full contract value plus consequential damages, or claim unjust enrichment against any party who received benefit from the consideration paid. Grace read it twice. What does that mean in English? It means Nestle can sue you personally for unjust enrichment, arguing that you inherited the ranch which was improved by their $200 million payment. Therefore, you were enriched by their money. They could put a lien on the entire property. That's insane. I didn't get their money. No, but you got the property. And the property was the collateral for their payment. It's creative lawyering, but it might work. Hank closed the contract. We have two options. One, we fight them in court for years and risk losing everything. Two, we negotiate. I'm not selling them the water. I know, but maybe we can offer something else. Grace looked at him. Like what? Like helping them recover their money from Vivian's hidden accounts. We cooperate with their forensic investigation, help them trace where she moved the funds, they recover what they can, and in exchange they release all claims against you and the property. Will that work? Maybe. Depends on how much they can recover and how badly they want to avoid a public relations disaster. Grace thought about it. The idea of helping Nestle recover anything made her sick, but losing the ranch would be worse. Set up a meeting, she said. But I want James Whitehorse there too. If we're going to negotiate, I want all the cards on the table. 2 days later, Grace flew to New York with Hank and James. The meeting was in a conference room on the 40th floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that could seat 30 people. Nestle sent 6 lawyers and 2 executives. Grace brought Hank and James. The lead Nestle attorney, a woman named Patricia Morrison, got straight to business. Miss Mackenzie, we're prepared to pursue all legal remedies available to us. However, we're also prepared to discuss a reasonable settlement that protects both parties' interests. Grace leaned forward. Before we discuss settlement, let's be clear about something. You paid $200 million to a woman who was committing fraud. She never had legal authority to sell those water rights. Your due diligence failed. That's on you, not me. One of the executives, a man in his 50s with silver hair, spoke up. We conducted extensive title searches and legal review. Mrs. Hale presented herself as the legal widow and heir. We had no reason to believe otherwise. Except she was a bigamist and a murderer. Those are things competent due diligence would have caught. Morrison jumped in. Miss Mackenzie, assigning blame won't help us reach a resolution. The facts are simple. We paid money in good faith. That money is now evidence in a criminal case or missing entirely. We need to recover it, and we need assurance that our commercial interests are protected. Hank pulled out a folder. We've done some investigating of our own. Vivian Hale moved the $200 million through 6 different shell companies and 3 offshore accounts. $70 million is frozen. $30 million went to pay off debts on the ranch and equipment. Another $40 million appears to have been transferred to accounts in the Cayman Islands. The remaining $60 million is unaccounted for. Morrison looked at her notes. Our forensic team reached similar conclusions. The Cayman accounts are accessible with proper court orders. We're pursuing that, but the missing $60 million is a problem. James Whitehorse spoke for the first time. It's only a problem if you insist on full recovery before releasing your claims. But there's another way to look at this. Everyone turned to him. You paid for water rights you can't have, but what you really wanted was access to a reliable water source for commercial development. The Mackenzie Aquifer isn't the only water source in Montana. The Northern Arapahoe Water Trust controls access to several aquifers. We could partner with you on a sustainable extraction project. Limited volume, community oversight, fair pricing. You get your water. We get jobs and infrastructure. Nobody drains the aquifer." Morrison frowned. "We're not interested in partnerships. We want ownership." "Ownership of what?" James asked. "Contaminated water from an illegally operated mine that's poisoning the watershed. Because that's what you'd be buying if the Mackenzie deal had gone through." Grace saw where James was going and jumped in. "My father was investigating Vivian's mining operation. Copper Creek Mine has been dumping toxic waste into the water table for 3 years. The EPA is opening an investigation. Any water you extracted would be tainted. Worthless. You paid $200 million for poison." The Nestle team exchanged glances. One of the lawyers whispered to Morrison. Morrison cleared her throat. "We were not aware of environmental contamination issues." "Now you are," Hank said, "which means if you pursue the contract, you'll end up with liability for environmental cleanup. That'll cost you more than $200 million. The silver-haired executive leaned back. "So what exactly are you proposing?" Grace looked at James, then at Hank. They discussed this on the plane. "We propose this," Grace said. "You drop all claims against me and the Mackenzie property. You work with law enforcement to recover what you can from Vivian's hidden accounts. Whatever you recover, you keep. Whatever you can't recover, you write off as a loss from dealing with a criminal." "That leaves us with nothing," Morrison said. "No," James said. "We also propose that Aquacorp gets first negotiating rights for any future water extraction projects developed by the Mackenzie Whitehorse Water Trust. Sustainable, limited extraction. 15-year contract. Fair market rates. Completely legal and transparent." And Grace added, "We'll publicly announce the partnership. You get positive PR. You go from being the corporation that tried to steal water from Montana ranchers to being the corporation that's investing in sustainable water management and supporting tribal partnerships. Your stock price recovers. The boycotts end. You look like heroes." The room went quiet. The Nestle team conferred in whispers for 5 minutes. Finally, Morrison spoke. "We need to discuss this with our board. Can you give us 24 hours? 12, Grace said. "After that, this offer expires and I'm calling the Washington Post." Nestle called back in 10 hours. They agreed to drop all claims against Grace and the property. They would pursue recovery of their $200 million through legal action against Vivian's estate and hidden accounts. Whatever they recovered, they'd keep. The shortfall would be written off. In exchange, they got a 15-year partnership with the Mackenzie Whitehorse Water Trust for sustainable extraction rights, plus the positive publicity of supporting tribal water management. The announcement made national news. Nestle spun it as corporate responsibility and environmental stewardship. Grace didn't care how they spun it. She'd protected the ranch, protected the water, and sent Nestle away without what they really wanted: ownership. But there was still one more battle to fight. Vivian's murder trial began in September, 4 months after her arrest. The prosecution moved quickly. They had overwhelming evidence: Dylan's recordings, the autopsy, Elizabeth's testimony, Marcus's statements about Vivian's plans. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Grace attended every day, sitting in the front row, watching Vivian try to maintain her composure as witness after witness destroyed her. The defense tried to argue that the recordings were taken out of context, that the arsenic could have come from environmental exposure, that Marcus was lying for money. It didn't work. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: 2 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of fraud, forgery, embezzlement. The judge sentenced her to life, without possibility of parole. Vivian stood for the sentencing without emotion. But when the judge asked if she had anything to say, she turned and looked directly at Grace. "You think you won," Vivian said, voice cold and clear. "You think you're some kind of hero, but you're just a spoiled little girl playing rancher. You'll never fill your father's boots. You'll run that ranch into the ground within 5 years. Everything Roy built will turn to dust." The courtroom was silent. Grace stood. "You're right about one thing," she said. "I'll never fill my father's boots, but I don't have to. I'm filling my own." The bailiff led Vivian away. She didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Grace gave a short statement. Justice had been served. Her father could rest in peace. The ranch would continue. The water would be protected. Then she got in her truck and drove home to Montana. That night, Grace sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the western mountains. Walt came out and sat in the chair beside her. "Long day," he said. "Long year." "You did good, Gracie. Roy would be proud." Grace nodded. She was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of tired that comes from fighting too hard for too long. But it was over. Vivian was in prison, the ranch was secure, the water was protected, Nestle was neutralized. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dylan. "Thank you for giving me my life back. Starting fresh in Seattle. Got a job with an environmental nonprofit. Maybe I can do some good for once." Grace smiled and texted back. "You already did, good luck." Another text came in, unknown number. "This is Marcus. Shoulders healed up, heading back to Vegas. Just wanted to say thanks for the 50 grand and for taking down that bitch. If you're ever in town, first rounds on me." Grace laughed. She texted back, "I'll hold you to that." She set her phone down and looked out at the land. 4 generations, 134 years, and now it was hers. The responsibility felt heavy, but also right. Walt stood to go inside. "You coming?" "In a minute." Grace sat alone as the stars came out, brilliant and cold. Somewhere out there her father was watching, her mother too, and they were proud. She'd fought the fight they couldn't finish. She'd protected what they'd built. She'd honored their memory. And tomorrow, she'd start building something new, something that would last another 100 years. But tonight, she just sat and let herself feel the weight lift. A letter arrived a week later, prison mail. Grace almost threw it away without opening it, but something made her pause. The return address was Montana Women's Prison, but the handwriting wasn't Vivian's. She opened it. Inside was a short note. "Miss Mackenzie, my name is Rebecca Torres. I'm Vivian Hale's cellmate. She asked me to send you this letter. She says there's something about your father's death you don't know, something that changes everything. She'll only tell you in person. If you want the truth, visit her. If not, throw this away. Your choice." Grace stared at the letter. It was probably a lie, another manipulation, Vivian trying to get one more chance to hurt her. But what if it wasn't? What if there was something else, something she'd missed? Grace folded the letter and put it in her desk drawer. She wouldn't visit Vivian, wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Whatever secret Vivian claimed to have, it could stay buried. Grace had her answers. Her father was murdered, justice was served, the ranch was safe. That was enough. But late that night, alone in her room, Grace found herself thinking about the letter, about what Vivian might know, about secrets that died with the guilty. She fell asleep still thinking about it. And in the morning, she made a decision. She would visit Vivian once, hear what she had to say, then close that door forever. Because Grace Mackenzie didn't leave things unfinished. And if there was one more truth to uncover about her father's death, she needed to know it. Even if it destroyed her. 2 weeks passed before Grace changed her mind about the prison letter. 2 weeks of waking up at dawn to work the ranch, of hiring back hands, of making decisions about cattle and fencing and water distribution. 2 weeks of trying to move forward while that letter sat in her desk drawer like a splinter under skin. Finally, on a gray morning in late September, she called the prison. Montana Women's Prison sat 2 hours south of Billings, a sprawl of concrete and razor wire against brown hills. Grace signed in at the visitor center, passed through metal detectors, and followed a guard down a long corridor that smelled like disinfectant and despair. They put her in a visiting room with plexiglass dividers and phones for communication. Grace sat in a plastic chair and waited. Vivian appeared 5 minutes later, led by a female guard. She wore orange prison scrubs. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry. She looked smaller somehow, older. But her eyes were the same, cold, calculating, triumphant. She sat down across from Grace and picked up the phone. Grace picked up hers. "I knew you'd come," Vivian said. "What do you want?" "To tell you the truth about your father's death." "I know the truth. You poisoned him." Vivian smiled. "Yes, but that's not the whole truth. The truth is more complicated, more interesting." She leaned forward. "Your father knew I was poisoning him." Grace felt her blood go cold. "You're lying." "Am I? Think about it, Grace. Roy was the smartest man I ever met. You think he didn't notice when he got sick only after I gave him his medication? You think he didn't see the pattern? Then why didn't he stop you?" "Because he wanted to give you something more valuable than his ranch. He wanted to give you justice." Vivian's smile widened. 6 months before he died, Roy figured out what I was doing. He could have stopped taking the pills, could have confronted me, could have called the police. But he didn't. He kept taking the poison, kept documenting his symptoms, kept building the case against me. He sacrificed himself to make sure you'd have ironclad evidence to destroy me. Grace couldn't breathe. "You're lying. He wouldn't do that." "Wouldn't he? Roy Mackenzie, the war hero, the man who threw himself on grenades for his buddies in Vietnam." Vivian laughed. "He loved you more than he loved himself, Grace. Way more. And he knew the only way to protect you and the ranch was to let me kill him. So that's what he did. He died for you." Grace's hands shook. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to live with it. I want you to know that your victory cost your father his life, that he died in agony because you weren't there, because you abandoned him." Vivian pressed her palm against the plexiglass. "You won, Grace. You got the ranch. You got the money. You got justice, but you'll never get him back. And every day for the rest of your life, you'll know he died so you could win." Grace stood up. "You're a monster." "Maybe, but I'm a monster who told you the truth. Sleep well, sweetheart." Grace hung up the phone and walked out. She made it to her truck before the tears came. She sat in the parking lot and cried until she couldn't cry anymore. Then she drove back to Crow's Nest Ridge. The lined shack stood silent in the afternoon sun. Grace climbed down into the bunker and went straight to the filing cabinets. Her father's medical journal. She'd read it before, but not closely. Now she read every word. And there it was. Month 4. Notice the tremor started exactly 2 hours after Vivian gives me evening medication. Interesting timing. Month 5. Symptoms significantly worse this week. Vivian insisting I take double doses. Says doctor recommended it. Doctor says no such thing. She's increasing the dosage. Month 6. I know what she's doing now. Confirmed with private lab, arsenic in the pills, small doses accumulating. She thinks I'm too senile to notice. I'm not, but I'm not stopping her either. I need documentation. I need time to move the assets. I need Grace to have everything she needs to take Vivian down. This is the only way. Month 7, sicker now. Hard to walk some days, but the evidence is building. Dylan's recordings, Elizabeth's suspicions, my own symptoms. When Grace demands an autopsy, they'll find everything. Worth it. Month 8, very weak now. Vivian confident she's won. Good, let her think that. 2 more weeks and the last assets will be moved, then I can let go. Grace, if you're reading this, know that I chose this. I wasn't murdered. I was a soldier completing his mission. This was my choice. I love you, Dad. Grace closed the journal and sat in the silence of the bunker. Her father hadn't just died for her. He'd chosen it, planned it, executed it like a military operation. He'd given his life to give her justice. The weight of it was crushing, but also strangely beautiful. This was love in its purest form, sacrifice without hesitation. A father protecting his daughter the only way he could. Grace wiped her eyes and climbed back up to the surface. She stood on the ridge looking out at the valley, at the ranch in the distance, at the mountains beyond. I won't let it be for nothing, Dad, she whispered. I promise. Over the next 6 months, Grace threw herself into rebuilding. She paid off the ranch debt with money from the bunker. She brought back every hand Vivian had fired. She upgraded equipment, repaired fences, and invested in sustainable ranching practices that would make the operation profitable for generations. But more importantly, she partnered with James Whitehorse to create something new. The Mackenzie Whitehorse Water Trust launched in March with a ceremony attended by 200 people, ranchers, tribal elders, state officials, and journalists. The trust would manage the aquifer sustainably, provide water to all downstream users at fair rates, and invest profits back into conservation. Grace stood at the podium in front of the gathered crowd and spoke. My father believed water is life. He believed it belongs to the people, not corporations. He died protecting that belief. Today we honor his memory by making sure this water stays in the hands of the community. Forever. The crowd rose in standing ovation. James Whitehorse spoke next, his voice carrying across the valley. For too long, corporations have treated our water like a commodity to be bought and sold. The Mackenzie Whitehorse Trust says no more. This water stays here. It flows for our children and our children's children. This is how we honor those who came before and protect those who come after. More applause, more cheers. After the ceremony, an old rancher named Tom Morrison approached Grace. He'd known her father for 40 years. Roy would be proud, Tom said, eyes wet. You did what he couldn't, you saved us all. Grace shook his hand. We saved each other. That summer, Grace began restoration work on the line shack at Crow's Nest Ridge, not to tear it down and rebuild, to restore it to what it had been, what it was always meant to be. She hired local contractors, men who'd worked with her father, who knew the old ways of building. They replaced rotted logs with new timber, matched the original construction. They rebuilt the roof with hand-split shakes. They restored the stone fireplace her great-great-grandfather had laid in 1892. The work took 4 months. Grace spent weekends there, helping where she could, learning the craft of restoration, learning to honor what came before while making it strong enough to last. In August, the work was finished. The cabin stood proud and solid, looking like it might have looked 100 years ago. Simple, honest, built to last. Grace furnished it simply: a wood stove, a bunk, a table and 2 chairs, and in the main room she installed the desk from the bunker, her father's desk, where he'd sat and planned his final fight. She kept the bunker below but changed its purpose. No longer a vault for secrets, now a museum, a reminder of what her father had done, what he'd sacrificed. She placed his journals there, his photographs, the evidence he'd gathered, all of it preserved behind glass, labeled and documented. Someday she'd open it to the public. Let people see the truth. Let Roy's story be told. But first, she needed to finish one more thing. In the bottom drawer of her father's desk, hidden behind a false panel Grace hadn't noticed before, she found a small wooden box. Inside was a photo album and a letter. The letter was addressed to her in her father's handwriting. The envelope was sealed with wax, dated 1 week before he died. Grace sat in the restored cabin as the sun set, opened the envelope and read. Dearest Gracie, if you're reading this, you found the final piece. Good, you always were the smart one. By now you know what I did, how I let Vivian poison me, how I chose death over running. I want you to understand why. When your mother died, I was lost. Sarah was my anchor, my reason, my heart. Without her, I was just a man playing at being alive. Vivian saw that weakness and exploited it. I let her in because I was lonely. Biggest mistake of my life. When I realized what she was, I knew I had two choices: divorce her and watch her destroy everything out of spite, or play the long game, build the evidence, move the assets, give you the tools to win. The poisoning wasn't something that happened to me, Gracie. It was something I used. When I realized she was killing me, I saw the opportunity. Every dose of poison was another nail in her coffin. Every symptom was evidence you'd need. I documented everything. Let her think she was winning, all while building the case that would destroy her. I know this is hard to accept. I know you'll blame yourself for not being there, for not seeing it, for not saving me. Don't. This was my choice, my mission, and I completed it. I was a soldier, baby girl. Soldiers understand sacrifice. Sometimes you take the bullet so your buddy can live. That's what this was. I took the poison so you could have justice, so the ranch would survive, so the water would stay protected. Was it worth it? Every second, every painful dose, every moment of suffering, all worth it to know you'd be okay, to know you'd fight, to know you'd win. The photo album in this box contains pictures from when your mother and I first bought this land. We were young, broke, madly in love. We built this cabin with our own hands. Spent our first year here with no electricity, no running water, nothing but each other and the land. Those were the happiest days of my life. Not the money, not the empire, not the success, just this cabin, this ridge, your mother, and later you. Everything else was noise, Gracie. This was the signal, this place, this water, this land. This was what mattered. I didn't leave you the ranch because it's valuable. I left it because it's yours. 4 generations of Mackenzies in that dirt. Your great-great-grandfather homesteaded it. Your grandfather expanded it. I built it into something bigger. And now you'll make it into something better. The bunker full of money isn't the inheritance, baby girl. The inheritance is knowing your worth, knowing you come from people who fought for what they believed in, who chose service over self, who understood that some things are worth dying for. Water is life, Gracie. Protect it. The land is legacy. Honor it. And family is everything. Remember it. I love you more than all the money in that bunker, more than all the land in Montana, more than my own life, which is why I gave my life to protect yours. Don't mourn me too long. I lived well, loved deeply, died with purpose. Not everyone gets that. Now you live, you love, you build. And when your time comes, you'll know you did it right because you'll have taught your children what I taught you. Some things are worth more than money. Some fights are worth losing your life over, and some people are worth dying for. You were worth it, Gracie. You always were. Love forever. Dad. Grace read the letter 3 times. Then she opened the photo album. The first picture showed her parents standing in front of this cabin, newly built, her mother pregnant with Grace. Her father's arm around her mother's shoulder, both of them smiling like they'd won the lottery even though they didn't have a dime. The caption in her mother's handwriting, "First day at our real home. We don't have money, but we have each other, and we have water, and we have love. That's enough. That's everything." Grace turned pages. Her parents building fences, digging irrigation ditches, her mother's garden, her father teaching young Grace to fish in the creek below the ridge, Christmas mornings in this cabin before they built the big house, birthday parties, family dinners. Every picture showed the same thing: joy, love, connection. This cabin wasn't a punishment. It was a return to what mattered. The big house, the money, the empire, all of that was what her father had built, but this cabin was who he'd been. And now Grace understood. The inheritance wasn't wealth, it was wisdom. The knowledge that the things that matter can't be bought or sold. They can only be protected, honored, passed down. She closed the album and sat in the quiet of the cabin as night fell. Outside, the stars came out. Inside, the wood stove crackled softly. Grace felt at peace for the first time since her father died. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, Grace announced she was moving her primary residence to the line shack. The ranch hands thought she was crazy. Walt just smiled. "Roy would like that," he said. Grace kept the big house for ranch operations and guest quarters, but she lived in the cabin, woke up to sunrises over the eastern plains, fell asleep to the sound of wind in the pines, spent her evenings reading by the wood stove or sitting on the porch watching the stars. She installed solar panels for electricity, dug a new well for fresh water, added a small bathroom and a kitchen, modern conveniences in an old shell, respecting the past while living in the present. People asked why. Why live in a small cabin when you own a mansion? Why choose simplicity over luxury? Grace's answer was always the same. Because this is home. 2 years after her father's death, on the anniversary of that day in the cemetery, Grace stood at his grave with Walt beside her. She'd come every month since the funeral, always alone except for Walt, never with flowers, just with words. "I did it, Dad," she said to the stone marker. "The ranch is profitable, the water trust is working, 23 families have clean water, Nestle is gone, Vivian is locked up forever, and I'm happy, really happy, for the first time in years." Walt put his hand on her shoulder. "He knows, Gracie. Wherever he is, he knows." Grace nodded. "I used to be angry at him for sending me away, for making me leave, for the 8 years we lost, but I get it now. He was teaching me to stand on my own, to be strong enough to fight without him. He was preparing me. That's what good fathers do." They stood in silence for a while, then Walt cleared his throat. "Got something to tell you. Been waiting for the right time." Grace looked at him. "What?" "I'm retiring, for real this time. I'm 74 years old, body's wearing out, time to rest." Grace felt panic rising. "Walt, I can't run this place without you." "Sure you can. You've been doing it for 2 years. I'm just standing around looking important," he smiled. "But I got a suggestion for my replacement." "Who?" "Dylan." Grace blinked. "Dylan, Vivian's son. He called me last week. Says he's been working with environmental groups in Seattle, learning sustainable ranch management. He wants to come home, make amends, learn from you. I think you should give him a chance." Grace thought about it. Dylan had helped her take down Vivian, had given her the recordings, had risked everything. "Okay," she said, "tell him to call me." Dylan arrived 3 weeks later driving a beat-up truck, carrying everything he owned in 2 duffel bags. He was different, quieter, steadier. The scared boy had become a serious man. Grace gave him a job as assistant foreman under Walt's supervision, watched him work, watched him earn the trust of the other hands, watched him prove himself day after day. 6 months later, when Walt officially retired, Grace promoted Dylan to foreman. The other hands grumbled at first, Vivian's son running Roy's ranch, but Dylan won them over. He worked harder than anyone, never complained, never took shortcuts, and he never mentioned his mother. One night, sitting on the cabin porch after a long day, Dylan said what he'd been holding in. "I know I can never make up for what she did. You're not responsible for her choices. I know, but I still carry it, the shame, the guilt, the knowledge that my blood is her blood." Grace looked at him. "Blood doesn't define you, Dylan, choices do. You chose to help me, to testify, to change your life. That's what matters. Your father gave me a chance too, you know, near the end. He told me I wasn't my mother, said I could choose to be better. I didn't believe him then. Do you believe it now?" Dylan nodded. "Yeah, I do." "Good, because I need a foreman I can trust, and I trust you." Dylan's eyes were wet. "Thank you, Grace, for everything." That fall, the Mackenzie Whitehorse Water Trust held its first annual meeting. 250 people attended, ranchers, tribal members, state officials. They reviewed the year's operations, sustainable extraction, fair pricing, profits reinvested in conservation. It was working. James Whitehorse presented the financial report. The trust had generated $3 million in revenue, distributed water to 30 ranching operations, funded 2 new conservation projects, and kept the aquifer healthy. Grace stood to speak, looking out at the faces of people who depended on the water her family had protected for 4 generations. "A wise man once told me that water is life," she said, "that it belongs to the people, not corporations, that our job isn't to own it but to protect it. That man was my father, Roy Mackenzie. Everything we're doing here, we're doing because he believed some things are worth more than money, worth fighting for, worth dying for. This water is one of those things, and as long as I'm alive it will stay protected. That's my promise to him. That's my promise to you." Standing ovation. After the meeting, Tom Morrison approached her again, older now, walking with a cane. "You know what Roy told me once," Tom said. "He said the measure of a man isn't what he builds, it's what he protects. You're protecting everything that matters, Grace. You're doing him proud." Grace smiled. "We're doing it together." That winter, Grace spent her evenings in the cabin going through the last of her father's papers. In the bottom of the final filing cabinet in the bunker, she found a metal box she'd missed before. Inside was a collection of letters, all addressed to Grace, all sealed, all dated over the last 8 years. One for each Christmas she'd missed, each birthday, each major holiday. Her father had written to her every year, even though she never came, even though he knew she wouldn't read them. He'd written them anyway. Grace opened the first one, Christmas 8 years ago, the year after he'd sent her away. "Dearest Gracie, Merry Christmas, I miss you. The tree looks empty without you here to put the star on top. I know you're angry, you have every right to be, but I hope someday you'll understand I did what I did out of love. You're meant for more than this ranch, baby girl. Go be amazing. Love, Dad." She read them all, every letter, every word. 8 years of love, 8 years of hope, 8 years of waiting for her to come home. And she'd never known. Grace sat in the cabin and cried, Not from grief, from gratitude. Her father had never stopped loving her, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing in her. Even when she'd given up on him, he hadn't given up on her. That was the final inheritance, the one that mattered most. Unconditional love. On the third anniversary of her father's death, Grace held a small ceremony at Crow's Nest Ridge. She invited everyone who'd helped her fight: Hank, James, Marcus, Dylan, Elizabeth, Walt, and about 50 ranchers whose families had used Mackenzie water for 3 generations. At the highest point of the ridge, Grace unveiled a monument, a simple granite stone with bronze lettering. Colonel Roy Edward Mackenzie, 1956 to 2024. He protected the water so the water could protect us. Below that, a quote Grace had chosen from one of his letters. Some things are worth more than money. Some fights are worth losing your life over. And some people are worth dying for. The crowd stood in silence as the sun set over the western mountains. Then, one by one, each person came forward and placed a small stone at the base of the monument, an old ranching tradition. Each stone a prayer, each stone a promise to remember. When everyone had placed their stones, Grace added hers. Smooth river rock from the creek below, the same creek where her father had taught her to fish when she was 7. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, "for everything." That night Grace sat on the cabin porch alone. The stars were brilliant, the air was cold and clean. In the distance she could hear cattle settling for the night. Closer, the wind through the pines. Her phone buzzed, a text from Walt. "Your dad left one more thing in the bunker, northwest corner, behind the loose panel. Find it when you're ready." Grace went down into the bunker with a flashlight, found the panel Walt mentioned, pulled it free. Behind it was a small shelf with a single item, a journal, brand new, never written in. On the cover, a note in her father's handwriting. "For Grace's daughter or son, whichever comes first, tell them about their grandfather, tell them about the water, tell them about sacrifice, and tell them they come from a line of people who chose service over self. Make them proud of where they came from. Make them worthy of what they'll inherit. Love, Roy." Grace held the journal and understood the final lesson. This wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning. Someday she'd have children. She'd raise them here, teach them about water and land and legacy. She'd show them the cabin, the bunker, the monument. She'd read them their grandfather's letters, and she'd pass on the inheritance that mattered. Not money, wisdom. Not wealth, worth. Not what you own, what you protect. Grace climbed back up to the cabin. She placed the journal on the shelf beside her father's photo album, waiting for the future. Then she walked outside and stood on the ridge, looking out at the valley that 4 generations of Mackenzies had called home. The water flowed below, clear and cold and eternal. The land stretched away in all directions, strong and solid and enduring. The sky above held more stars than anyone could count. And Grace Mackenzie stood at the center of it all, guardian of the inheritance, keeper of the promise, daughter of the sacrifice. She'd lost her father, but she'd found her purpose. She'd gained a fortune, but she'd learned what was priceless. She'd won the fight, but she'd discovered the real victory was in knowing what was worth fighting for. Blood and water, family and land, past and future. All of it connected, all of it sacred, all of it hers to protect. Not because she owned it, because it owned her. Grace took a deep breath of Montana air, smiled at the stars, and went back inside her cabin. Tomorrow she'd wake up early, feed the cattle, check the fences, meet with the water trust, do the work her father had taught her. But tonight she'd rest, in the home he'd built, on the land he'd protected, living the life he died to give her. And that was enough. That was everything.